Good morning. Today is October 5th, 2007. We're meeting today with Mr. Dexter Greer in Haverhill, Massachusetts. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Haverhill Veterans Oral History Project. Welcome, Mr. Greer.
Morning. Morning.
Let's start out, if we could. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, your parents, and any siblings you had.
All right, I was born September 5th, 1920. Oh, you're going to make me say 24. But anyway, it's 1924. Turned 83 here a month ago. Born and brought up in Haverhill school system, Haverhill Trade School. When World War II came along, I had some decisions to make. One of the decisions was which branch of service was I going to go into. I knew I was going to go into one. I'd been even a World War I fiend. I had studied that pretty thoroughly. So I knew a little bit about it, but I didn't realize what I was getting into, of course, but I did anyway. And it worked out fine. I had a real close chum named Kenny Sherman. Born and brought up together. The two of us spent countless numbers of hours deciding who was going to go in which branch. I couldn't convince him to the Marine Corps, and he couldn't convince me to the Navy. So we split. He went Navy, Great Lakes Training Center, and I went to Parris Island, South Carolina.
How did you come to choose the Marines?
I had some friends in the neighborhood that the senior member, George Lee, his name was in World War I. And he had two sons. The two sons were, one was Bill, and the other was Joe. Bill was a Peking, China embassy guard in the mid-30s. And he was involved in the Yangtze and the original Japanese problem in China and whatever. He came home, and when he came home, he worked me over to no end. And at that time, his other brother was in the service. He was in California somewhere. He wrote to me. So I had father and two sons working me over. I had no choice but to go in the Marine Corps. Enlisted, went to Parris Island, South Carolina. Did the usual. Made out pretty well. Of a group in rifle, there was about 300 or so of us in contention, and I ended up maybe number 3, so I thought I was a pretty good shot. I had my act together for that, hoping I'd never have to use it, but that wasn't the case. Went through Parris Island, South Carolina, went up to Tent City in North Carolina. It was during the winter months, and I've never seen anything so cold in my life. It was fierce.
Let me back up real quick and ask real quick. Outside of, before you departed for basic training, had you traveled much out of Haverhill?
Not really.
Yeah.
No, I was a homeboy,
yeah.
And I worked in a lumber mill, processed lumber, drove a truck, was very machinery conscious, and that was basically it. I was ready for the Marine Corps. I don't know if the Marine Corps was ready for me, but I was ready for change.
Sorry to interrupt there, but you said that that was getting back to that cold period.
Yeah. So it was bitterly cold, and we did have a heck of a good football team down there at the time, but that was short-lived. And for some reason or other, they were in a rush to get me out to the West Coast. Went out on a troop train. Landed in San Diego. We went right out of the train in this enormous warehouse. Went right out of the train and around the corner and up the gangway and onto the USS Wharton. The troop transport that had docked. It was waiting for me, I guess. So they loaded that whole train onto there, and there was as many as 3 trains altogether in the process of loading onto that transport. It was what they call a Class A transport. The name of it was a USS Wharton. And we boarded it, and one of the guys that was with us was we had a platoon sergeant by the name of Hop, H-O-U-P-T, that was with us in boot camp. He was a tough character. The two of us clashed constantly. But when we got ready to go, we asked him if he would consider shipping out with us.
Huh.
And he said yes.
Just out of respect? You had respect for the guy?
Oh, tremendous. The guy was just great. And his purpose in life was to keep people alive, and he did just that. More about him later.
Uh-huh.
But he was with us. We went aboard ship. We left San Diego, and we went to American Samoa.
Can I ask you how the ship ride over was? I've heard countless stories about how miserable that could have been. Did you get your sea legs, I guess would be one of the questions.
No problem sea legs, but the transport was just so overcrowded, and the chow lines were, by the time you got to the chow and got your tray and it was ready for the evening meal, it was just so mass confusion with just thousands of guys, and it was quite a scene, really, but wasn't much we could do about it. We had to kind of go with the flow. But it was all right. I understood what was going on, and they were in a rush to get us some training, and training quick, and they had a lot of plans. And American Samoa was just a short stay, like 2 or 3 days. And we used the ship as a base, but we were in and out of the base itself and back, and we slept at night on a transport. Moved us from there to British Samoa. British Samoa was a crown plantation owned by the British. And in fact, each of their coconut trees cost the United States government $25 for each one we knocked down. And we knocked down plenty of them. But we stayed there for considerable length of time, probably in the 7th or 8th month, I would say we stayed right there. But it was a jungle training, fierce undergrowth. Couldn't see the hand in front of you. And of course you always had a lot of company too. You had the blowflies that would get into your clothes, a few snakes, and bugs of all kinds, both in your food and on your skin. It was tough to contend with.
What was that like? Here's a boy that grew up in New England, and now he's in the jungles of the South Pacific. What was that experience?
It was hard for us to understand what they were trying to do. Of course, they had plans of us. If you look back at it, it's a tie. Our upcoming training was being used as a basis from the Guadalcanal area. And the jungle and the mud and the swamps and stuff just destroyed those guys in Guadalcanal. Well, they were just a bit ahead of it. I got to give my government credit for that. And they wanted us trained to be able to survive in those kind of conditions. The undergrowth was, couldn't see the hand in front of it. It was like at night, and it never got to be daylight. You became very proficient in using a compass to get your butt back out of there. It was interesting. And the bananas were great. You haven't had a banana until it's grown right in your backyard, then it's a different story. But it was good training, very efficient. This platoon sergeant Hop that I had just wouldn't let go of me. It just seemed to be an endless train. And I had said to myself, when did I ever catch up with this guy? I should have left him right back in South Carolina. Finally, after we got done with American Samoa, boarded ship again. I should be able to remember one time, I think it was the Typhoon, USS Typhoon. And we went from there to French Noumea. And what was left of the fleet was in French Noumea. But the French were in the process of bailing out. They had heard the Nips were coming and they wanted no part of the French Noumea. So our part was to rein them in, keep them in and keep them tacked down. They wanted out. They were so convinced that the Japs were going to take over French Noumea. And a good share of the fleet, what was left of the fleet, was anchored in French Noumea. So that we knew we had a slight chance because we see a few left. So later, when we left French Noumea, we went to Honolulu, to Pearl Harbor. They wouldn't let us off the ship, but we had a first-hand view of the carnage. And
was there still quite a bit of damage still?
Yes, yeah. They were in the process of salvaging some of the transports, some of the military vessels, destroyers, and I think it was the USS West Virginia. We anchored right alongside of that thing. It was quite a sight. It left its mark, I'll tell you. It was just terrible. We left Pearl and went on our way to New Zealand. Australia first, I'm sorry. Went to Australia first. Spent a very short time down there, a week or 10 days. And back on the transport again. So from the Typhoon, that was the Rochambeau that took us to New Zealand and Wellington. Wellington, New Zealand was quite a country. It was really some great people there. They were fantastic. They did everything they could to make life bearable.
Were you able to get leave to go off and mingle with the population and sightsee a little bit?
Yeah. There was a family by the name of Richardsons. And it started one Friday night on Liberty. I had the opportunity, just a bunch of us coming off the base, and they showed up in this strange looking car. Smoke, it was terrible. They used to burn everything imaginable to try to keep their vehicles running. And they picked me up and they took me out to their home. They fed us their rations. They really did. Until we realized what was going on and just what they were doing for us. Of course, they were more than happy to see us there because there wasn't a male in New Zealand.
Huh.
They were gone. They were all up in the China, Burma, India theater, and so they were glad to have us around. Quite often when we'd leave camp and we knew that we were going to go out to their home, under the overcoat, quite often there'd be a gallon of marmalade or a large can of Spam or something, and it was just super to them, because they were really on a tight ration, and great people.
Uh-huh.
Later in the war, when I got hit, somebody wrote to Mrs. Richardson and told her about it. I guess she was a basket case trying to handle it, because they were just great. We thought a lot of each other, wrote for years. Finally, they both passed away now.
Yeah.
So New Zealand was our training spot for Tarawa. And we did everything imaginable. The jungle training was a waste because there wasn't a tree in sight in Tarawa. It was as flat as a pancake. And we left New Zealand and arrived in Tarawa. And it was quite a thing to go through. It really was.
Now, did they prepare you, the Marines, did they prepare you for what the Japanese were like and how they fought? And did you know much about what had happened at the canal? And how prepared were you to go into battle in that regards?
Wrong. Completely wrong. We had nothing. We were trained in jungles. We couldn't see the hand in front of you, pitch black. And there was this spot, 2¼ miles long, 800 yards across wide, and not a tree in sight. And that's part of the reasons that the Marine Corps took such a beating on the beach, because there was no place to hide.
Yeah.
You just couldn't do it. We had the seawall that was there. When we landed, our LCI lighter landing craft that took us in, we dumped the gun off in the beach, and it was in probably 10 or 20 feet of water. It's never to be seen there. I imagine it's still there. So we got ashore, and we were no longer anti-tank crewmen. We were now plain Joe riflemen. And everybody's seen the pictures of that seawall, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And the stack of bodies that was piled up on that seawall was just incredible. Just when we landed with with the lighter, and the gun, of course, I said, was dumped over the board, and we had to swim a short distance, but it was well over our head, with a full pack and gear. And when we got to the beach, one of our lieutenants says, "Hold that lighter. I'm going to put stretchers on that." And we put in, I want to say, from 6 to 8, laid them out across the deck of that lighter. And I remember the beach master with his megaphone yelling to the coxswain of that vessel, "Okay, you're loaded, get out of here." No answer, no response. He'd been shot right at the wheel of the vehicle. One of the Seabees that was part of the beach party come running down the beach and up that ramp and onto that lighter, and it took off. And I have no idea if he knew where he was going. I imagine he went out and picked out a ship. There was, many transports in the bay, and I'm sure they took care of him. But it was quite a sight. We stayed on that side of the Red Beach 2. And Red Beach 2 was alongside of this pier. I'm sure you've all seen this pier sticking out on the side of the beach. We went in that beach, and there was probably 100 men in our particular group. And this Lieutenant Shelton gathered up approximately 25 men, and he says, "Guys, we're going to go across the island. We're not going to stay here. This is a killing field. We're not going to make it." So we gathered up 25 guys, and we took off across that airstrip. Of the 25, there was 10 that didn't make it, because it was wide open. Once again, no place to hide.
Yeah.
No place to hide. What you did, you was just hope and pray. And as I've often said, there's no atheists on Tarawa. It just didn't happen. We got to the other side. It was relatively quiet, and it was late in the afternoon. That night, we got into a yelling contest with with some Japanese. And Betty Grable was a whore. Don't tell us any more about Betty Grable. And we're sick and tired of the story on Babe Ruth. Those are lies. He never, and we got into this yelling contest. I don't know how close they were, but it was within yelling distance of each other. The next thing I know, this platoon sergeant Hop came down and grabbed us by the neck. "Knock it off. They're going to know exactly where we are. You guys are fools." So once again, Hop did his thing, and his purpose was to keep us alive, and he did. After we got to the other side, some of us back on Red Beach 1 were missing in action. They didn't even know that we'd gone there. But we did. There was 15 of us. Had a fellow from upstate New York in Albany, had another one up in Watertown, New York that was with us. Earl Milson from California. Guy by the name of Brewer from South Carolina. And we survived. The next morning they sent people over to help us. to try to build that side of it up. And their percentage of guys that got across was even less. I would say there was probably 30 of them that attempted to come over, and I'd say less than half made it.
What was the terrain like on the other side? Were you dug into foxholes, or what?
No,
how were you?
no, perfectly flat, just as flat as your kitchen table. You know, if you could look from one side of that island to the other and see a bump or a rock or anything. You could make out a human being, and the Japs did. I mean, they had it their way, and we were just trying to tag along until we got them in a position where we could be lost. But it took a while. It really did. One of the replacements come over and jumped in a dugout section that I had dug on the beach, Black Beach. It was on the opposite side. And never knew his name. We chatted for less than 5 minutes, and he took a sniper's bullet and never even did find his name.
Mm-hmm.
Died within 6 inches of me. But that was what Tarawa was like. We lost 30 troops an hour for the first 30 hours. Totals in the KIAs were, oh boy, what was it, around 1,600. And the WIAs were somewhere around 2,500. But you have to remember, it all took place in 48 hours.
Wow.
So it was a massive killing field, as they put it. They took us off Tarawa the day before Thanksgiving. And put us aboard ship. And they had a combined church service. It's not a religious guy by any means, but I was that day, I'll tell you. And the church service was interrupted several times by the sea burials. Let's see if I can go back and put a name on that ship. What in Typhoon Rochambeau, Fielding's Island was the Biddle. And the Biddle was burying 10 or 20 an hour. And the only interruption was our church service, and the burials continued. Taps was just a continuous thing with, they had these slabs and they'd put 4 or so bodies on that and dump them overboard. And I was glad to see Tarawa go the other way. It wasn't an easy campaign by any means. But
Let me interrupt if I can and ask you what you were feeling in that 48 hours from, you said you were talking earlier, you said you'd been in four campaigns, so this was your first one. What were you thinking as you were taking that, what was going through your mind as you were going in that landing craft up to the battle? What was it like for that 48 hours? And then once you're back on ship and out of harm's way, what was it like? Were you able to decompress, and once you realized what you'd been through, how was that transition?
you know, it's interesting you should say that, because while you're doing it, while you're in that environment, I don't want to say you're unconscious, but you're not with it. It's really not real. It's something you're imagining. Later on, back in the ship, you know, you give it a lot of thought, and many a tear was shed, because you say to yourself, how could that be? How could they lose that many people that quick? And I was probably, from the first wave that went ashore in Tarawa, I probably was, well, we were supposed to have been, with the anti-tank guns, we were supposed to have been fourth. We lost the guns, so it ended up by us being third. So the first three groups were just slaughtered. Just bodies stacked, just like you'd stack cardwood in your backyard. It was just an incredible sight. And I've seen that pier, and I've seen that Red Beach too, and many photographs and stuff, and I could trace out the exact route we take to the letter.
Wow.
But it seems unreal. You do it at the time, but you do it how do I say it? You're in another world, I guess. It's just not,
Yeah.
not there. Got us aboard ship, and they took us back to Pearl. And started almost immediately for get us organized and straightened out for Saipan. I shouldn't say immediately, but they gave us probably 2 weeks. And got a little, some nourishment back into us and got us squared away, and we were ready to go again. We had pictures of the Marianas. It wouldn't tell us where we were going, but we knew it had to be either Guam, Saipan, or Tinian. The 3 were in a group together. And we picked out Saipan for us. And we took on Saipan. It was an excellent landing. Never got our feet wet even. Got right up alongside a dock. There was an old sugarcane mill there. Got right up alongside that dock and hopped off the lighter and said, boy, we got it made. This is going to be great. And we did fine for about D+3. D+4. We had a terrific fleet with us. We had a tremendous fleet that was there. It was everything imaginable. Because they had heard that the Nips were going to come back and drive us off. I'm questioning whether it was D+3 or 4, but we'll call it 3. The harbor was just covered. Destroyers, cruisers. The anti-aircraft cruiser San Juan was there. There was a hospital ship that was just on its way in, being set up at the dock. And we were, oh, man, we got it made. This is great. Did our thing during the day. A little sleep that night for D+4. D+4 arrived. Looked out in the harbor. Not a vessel in sight. Not a vessel. The only thing that we could see was one destroyer, and it was kind of sideways behind this hospital ship that they were in the process of putting in the dock. But that's where the first Battle of the Philippines took over, in the Philippine Sea. And that's where we really whipped them big time.
Yeah.
And it was some surprise, and we were uncomfortable out there.
Oh, geez, yeah.
You know, we said that they could have this place now. All they got to do is ask for it, because we couldn't fight. We couldn't defend ourselves. Shortly after we got in, probably D+6 or 7, they had landed an Army division to our right flank. It was made up of a New York State National Guard units. Guys were great. Guys did a heck of a job. There was a little rumble between generals at a later point in the campaign. Of course, the Marine style was to go, get the job done, and talk about it later. And the Army was one they'd study the situation first. I don't know which one is better, but we had to do our thing and they had to do theirs. We had a general by the name of Smith, and he took and relieved the Army general, told him that we just couldn't have it. They got in behind us is the reason for it. And we had Japs in front of us and Japs behind us.
Because you'd moved so far ahead.
Right.
Okay.
So
and
they left
around.
an enormous gap. Somebody said it was about 1,000 feet. And there was enough to let untold number of them get in behind us. I had finally got my sergeant's stripes. So I had 4 guns that I was involved with. 2 were my direct responsibility. 2 were off to the side, considerable distance away from us, and 2 were right close by. When the Japs got behind us, they annihilated our number 2 gun completely, took it right out, took all the crew.
How big of a crew with each gun?
5 and a truck driver.
Okay.
And the truck driver did survive, but he got cut up terrible. And the Japs had 11 tanks. They had 13 actually, but they put 11 on us. And we took care of 11. 11 come out very good. We were very pleased with our actions. But we missed 2. And those 2 in a later campaign, that's where I got hit myself. I survived the first bunch. My father always said, how come you could survive 11, but you couldn't survive 2? I says, well, even a blind squirrel gets a nut once in a while. So they did us in, and that's when the generals decided they'd do some changeover. The campaign continued. We had after I got hit, we had a Major Ludke. And he was a no-holds-barred skipper. Him and Platoon Sergeant Hop were made of the same mold. You got the job done and then you talked about it afterwards. And that was what when anybody would join the outfit, if they were troops that had to have their hands held, they'd disappear. He'd send them somewhere. And he was good at it. And Hop was just as good as well. You know, they could read the tea leaves. When the incident, we had a friendly fire incident. When the Nips got in behind our number 2 gun, we had a case of Marines shooting Marines. And it was my gun, it was my responsibility, although I wasn't there, I was back at another station. When it all boiled down, I said to the skipper, I've got some paperwork to do. And he said, what paperwork? He conveniently forgot, and so did I. I say I forgot it at the time, but I still have it to this day.
Right.
Those guys paid a price, and I don't think it was right, but there was nothing I could do about it. They replaced. We got a bunch of replacements. Out of 24 men, let me see. Out of 24 men, we lost 16. It was around 10 and 6, 10 wounded and 6 KIAs. So they replaced them and we went merrily along our way for the rest of the island. We ended up in that, Tapachow is the name of the mountain. I'm sure everybody's seen where the women and children were jumping off the cliff up there.
Right.
We watched that for hours. They held us up and didn't want us to rush the issue, and they brought up Japanese interpreters with speakers and jeeps, speakers on the back, mounted on the back of jeeps. And they tried their darndest to get them people to, you were not going to hurt them.
What, the Japanese had told them that you guys were monsters and you were going to kill and rape them all? And
we were going to do everything imaginable. And for a Marine to lay a hand on one of them, he would have been annihilated himself. It just wasn't in the books.
Yeah, yeah.
The troops, there was some actions there that sometimes they were off the beach. The truck driver of my number 1 gun was named Owen Childers. Come from Tulsa, Oklahoma. When I got hit in my left arm, he was in the process of patching me up. This was at night under parachute flares. And while he was doing that, he got hit himself. We were very, very close, and still are to this day. We still communicate, we still talk quite often. He was one that used to make these unregistered road calls at night, if you will. He would disappear. He used to take a fellow by the name of Don Kelvey with him. And I said, Chief, what the hell is this all about? What are you doing? Well, he says there's some interesting sights out there after dark. I said, I want to go. It's all right. He said, well, leave Kelvey back and he'll go with us. So I went with him a couple of different times. I don't know how to say it. His skills at night were just incredible. And he was very good at extracting gold teeth, too. He had no qualms about it.
Yeah.
Had a little bag with quite a collection of them in it, And we did that for, I would say 10 days or more. And finally, that Don Kelby that went in didn't come back. And Chief was pretty well upset. It got to be quite a thing. And in fact, our planners were interested in what we found and where we found them and what it was like and what was there. We'd only go out half, 3/4 of a mile, but it was in no man's land, so you had to pay attention. Ludke asked Childers one time, he says, how you making out with Dex? Good, he says, but he makes more noise than 2 cows, he says. So I always said to Chief, thanks, just what I needed, That's just because I'm not Indian, I don't, But we both bled together, and I've always said I think I got some little Cree Indian in my blood.
Yeah.
I'm damn proud of it. He's quite a guy, he really was. He really is. But Saipan did its thing.
What was the terrain there like on Saipan? Was it?
Saipan was mountainous. It was plenty of places to hide.
Okay.
And artillery was a big issue. Our anti-tank guns, we had that about 10 days of 11, the first group, and then later on when I got hit with 2 more.
Now, when you were hit, were you taken out of action, or you just patched up and you stayed?
No, Chief Childers, of course, like I said, was a truck driver.
Yeah.
And he got hit in the shoulder, right, what we call a clean hit, right in and right out. Gory and bloody, but really not a big deal. And I was in a sling in my left arm, so they got us down to an aid station. And they did some more patch-up work on us, and they said, you guys are leaving. And Childers said, we ain't leaving anywhere. What are they, crazy? He says, what we're going to do, he says, Dexter, they'll take us back to Pearl, patch us up, and we'll lose credit for all the 2 campaigns that we've had previously. We'll start off like green troops. He says, no way. I said, what are we going to do? I said, let's go back. I said, Ludke is going to kill us. So we went back, and Ludke stood there and looked at us, both of us in bandages, and he said, what am I going to do with this drag-tag group, he says. I said, we're going to stay, and I'm going to take my 2 guns back, and we're going to do our thing.
Wow.
And he says, I haven't seen a thing, but the only thing is, Dex, he says, your mother is going to get not only a WIA telegram, also going to get a missing in action, because you're registered down at the aid station, and you're not there. So he says, your mother's going to get 2 telegrams. She never did, luckily. She got the wounded in action, but not the missing. So that was
Let me interject a question then along those lines. How was communications back and forth with home? Were you able to get V-mail and such pretty regularly, or how was communications?
Was it tough? Yeah. After Saipan was secure, after Saipan and Tinian was secure, we went back and built a camp in Saipan. And we were there for, 6 months maybe, prior to Okinawa. And some mails did flow then. I remember I wrote a letter early on in the campaign, and I got an answer before I left, so that was 2 in 6 months.
Wow.
So it wasn't that often. But,
Wow.
My mother was able to put together where I was when I got hit. just from the news,
Huh.
just from the newscast.
Because you couldn't tell her.
No,
Yeah.
I couldn't tell her.
Yeah.
You know, there was, your letters would get all this
Yeah.
black redactments so that they wouldn't be something, one time you tied your shoes or something, but they would redact it out. And that was fine. We got our messages across. We knew we were all right. But when I got hit, I was able to follow it up with a letter immediately. It seems like the Red Cross got involved in it and allowed me to have, they had a name for it, a special letter. And I said, "Ma, don't worry about it. Got hurt worse in the backyard with a hammer and so forth." So I made as light about it as I could. But
How was it? I mean, what was it like? Were you shot, or was it shrapnel, or how?
yeah,
did...
it shrapnel got in the joint in the arm, my left arm. It got both the lower arm and the upper arm right in the joint. I did well to keep it. They were going to amputate it
Oh,
two different times, but it got as black as the soles of my shoes one time. But I was able to keep it, and it's been both good and bad. I've had my problems with it. But she was able to figure it out. When I got home, I knew, she says, I knew it. I didn't know the time frame. They wouldn't tell me. But it seems like they did have the date. Oh, I guess the date that they gave her and the date that I was at were different.
Okay.
So that was how it was, a little shady area that they built. But survived. Both Chillers and I, we stayed with the outfit. Regimental Weapons Company 2nd, got to get a plug in for them. And now we were getting ready for Tinian. Well, Tinian was less than a quarter of a mile away from the southern tip of Saipan. When we went in, they put in 75 and 105 millimeter anti-tank artillery stuff. And all the time, the 40 days that we were involved with Saipan, they were shelling Tinian constantly. And yet the 10th Marine Artillery seemed to think that you guys will have a piece of cake. And it was relatively easy. The only thing I had that really shook me up, and it shakes me up to this day, is my platoon sergeant Hop. And we lost him.
Oh.
Died right in my arms. A sniper's bullet right here. And I can see that pink blood and foam and stuff to this day. And what a hell of a thing to go through.
Wow.
But, he was still doing his thing. We had a young fellow that got hurt, and Hop was in the process of getting him evacuated and what have you. And Jesus, out of nowhere, one single shot, and it took him out. And oh, that did me in. I really wasn't with it for some time. But I guess that's how it's supposed to be. But it's tough to swallow. It's tough to handle. But Tinian was relatively easy. We know now, of course, why they wanted it. A terrific air base there for the B-29s. When we got done with Tinian, we went back to Saipan, built a camp, nice camp, and we had tents with floors in them, and it was pretty good. And when we left to go to Okinawa, the Army stole them. But as soon as we left, they took right over. Good luck to them. But Saipan was, we had some fun. We had some ball games, and we had competition with guns and marksmanships and what have you.
Able to get better food than rations?
Oh yes,
and much better.
Yeah, they had a kitchen, and
showers, and I mean, were you able to?
Yeah, the showers were a barrel arrangement. Was a fuel tank from one of the fighters, or an aircraft. I don't know what type it was, but it held about 125 gallons of water. We rigged up a a valve for it, and we could get in there and take showers. And it worked out pretty good. And the kitchen was good. I swear the cooks had all been blacksmiths on the outside, but nonetheless it was a change of pace, and it was good. Saipan was our home, like I say, for some time. We started a training project for Okinawa. But the division in our group, our regiment, was really ragtag. We had dozens and dozens of new replacements, but they didn't have a clue, really.
Yeah.
I mean, they just weren't with it. Out of each 6-man crew, there'd be 2 that knew what they were doing, and the rest were replacements. And it was hard. It was tough. Ludke used to get us together and say, "You've got to get those guys tuned.
Yeah.
You've got to get them spread away." And it was hard. I had a heck of a time doing it. When we went to Okinawa, we went aboard an LST 109. And I want to tell you, it was quite a thrill. How it stayed afloat, I'll never know. I remember they had pumps running constantly with water belching out the side of that LST constantly. When we went ashore in Okinawa, once again it was relatively easy. We got our feet wet, but it was nothing to it. We got ashore and there was nobody after us right away. It took us a few days for that to take place. And at about 14 days on Okinawa, they relieved us. But the reason for us, we couldn't defend ourselves. We just didn't have the guts or the manpower or the equipment or anything else. So they decided to get us off. And they put us back on LST 109. At the time, that was when the kamikazes really got going. And they took the LST that was with, there was 2 LSTs in the group. The one LST that was in front of us had got hit and went down right in front of us. Never touched us.
It was hit by a kamikaze pilot or
Yeah.
plane? Oh, jeez.
Yeah. And
What's that sight like? What?
that thing just folded up like it was made of cardboard. Somebody said there was 2 bombs in the aircraft, one on each wing. Somebody else said that there was one 500-pounder in it. But whatever it was, the LST just buckled right in half and was down in 3 minutes. It was out of sight, but it was never there. And we putted along as best we could. And when we got back to Pearl, we had all we could do to get to the dock. That's the one that should have been sunk. What a piece of trash. But it got us out there and got us back. So our Okinawa days ended at that point. And, a little bit easier back in Saipan then. We kind of cooled our jets a little and got us tried more replacements and some training and what have you. But Mr. Truman came along with his fat boy and saved the day for us. We were in the process of getting ready for the Kyushu in Japan. That's where we were scheduled to go. And expected losses were supposed to be around 3 million men.
I always ask this question. There was always the controversy as to whether we should have dropped the bomb or not. You being, I assume there's a good chance you and I wouldn't be talking today if it hadn't been dropped. Your thoughts on one way or the other on the bomb?
If MacArthur, that's a swear word. If Truman made a mistake, his mistake was he didn't drop 4 more. I always refer to it as, and people, and I've written letters and editorials and sound off articles in World War II magazines and one thing or another. And I've always come across somebody somewhere, somehow, that wants to defend that Nagasaki was a Christian, so and so on. And I said, having said that, I want you to read 2 books. One, I want you to read the Bataan Death Match. And the other one I want you to read is The Rape of Nanking in 1939. After you've read those 2 books, then we can talk about whether you should feel sorry for him or hate him even more than you did before. And it's, there's nobody who wants to have to go through that, and I can go along with that, but I should have thought of that before, not after.
Right.
Nagasaki, I had my picture taken at Ground Zero. Not much scenery around it, but
So you were part of the occupation force
we
then?
ended up in Nagasaki.
Oh, okay.
We went on the, let me see. Merriweather was the ship. And it took us up to Nagasaki. We landed right next to the Mitsubishi shipyard. There was 2 destroyers in there. Both destroyers had been tipped over from the atomic bomb.
Hmm.
We had a, there was a small PW, prisoner of war camp, just out of town in Nagasaki, probably 2 miles from Nagasaki. So they loaded us up with gear and trucks, but the trucks couldn't make it, so we ended up by having to carry everything that we could carry up the side of this mountain. It was really tough going, but nobody was shooting at us, so it was comfortable in that sense of the word. And I can remember this figure coming down the hill, the opposite direction from where we were. He had a Marine Corps jacket on. And somebody with a lot of mouth says, "Hey, Jarhead, you're going the wrong way." He says, "No, I'm not." He said, "I've been here for 2 years waiting for you." Ouch.
Oh, wow.
Ouch. In fact, I know the guy's name that said it. I could have wrung his neck. And he got awful quiet after that. But he'd been there for 2 years. He was an engineer on board a destroyer. And one of very few that got picked up. And he was brought to Nagasaki. And when they found out what he was and who he was, they figured that they were going to use his knowledge in a power plant. But the plant, the PW camp up there was mild compared to most of them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They were pretty well cared for, and by the time we got there, they had decided that it best they leave, so there was nobody there when we got there. But we ended up with all kinds of food and medical, and there was 3 medical teams. And I don't think they carried out anybody out of there. I think they were all walking, had the ability to walk out. And back to base camp, and we did some recon work. I worked with a photo team that was taking photographs, and there was probably 6 or 8 of us that worked with this crew, and all kinds of photos. I don't know really what it was all about, but we were their standby force, and we worked with them for about a week or 10 days. Had our own pictures taken exactly where the ground zero was.
Wow, wow. Can you describe the scene there? What?
Because we shouldn't have been there. We know that now.
Yeah, right. Radiation and such.
Radiation was a big issue, but for some reason or another, of the crew, there could be a couple of the guys that had lymphoma. They thought that it was a possibility, but they really couldn't pin it on him. The rest of us, we're immune to it, I guess. I don't know, we got away with it anyway. We stayed in Nagasaki for about 3-4 months, 5
Really?
months maybe. And the USS Merriweather come along and got us back to California. When we got to California, there was a dock strike. The skipper of the Merriweather got on the horn and he says, "Guys, we've got a problem. San Diego is closed up. There's a dock strike. Would you consider one more landing?" Well, you could hear him for miles, you know. Yes, let's go. Let's put this sucker right up there. We'll take care of the rest. And when they realized we were told to stay out. But when they realized that we were going anyway, they backed off and let us in and tied us down and what have you. We went from there back into trucks. A bunch of trucks was going to take us out to Camp Pendleton. And one of the guys, his name was Earl Goodwin. He lived in San Diego. And they had told us, once you get on that transport, that truck, you do not leave. You're registered here when you get on. You're going to be registered when you get off at Camp Pendleton. Well, this Earl looked out across the street and he see his sister.
Huh.
He bailed out of that truck. The truck had to be doing 30 miles an hour. And he bailed out of the truck, got up, picked himself up, and the last we see him, he was headed for his sister on the sidewalk. A great, great, great story. When we got back at roll call check-in time, there was Sergeant Earl Millicent and myself and Stubby Phillips, the three of us. I says, "We got to cover for him somehow." He says, "I've been lying in this Marine Corps since the day I got here." He said, "I'm not going to have any trouble to lie a little more." So when they called off the names, he just said yup or yope or whatever it was to make sure that he was there. And he did. He joined us later, but he could care less. He was leaving.
Sure, yeah.
Stayed a short time. Called my mother. And my mother says, I had a cousin come from Bucksport, Maine. She says, "Sonny is in Camp Pendleton. Look him up." I says, "Ma, there's 2 divisions of Marine Corps here. There's 50,000 Marines here. You've got to be kidding me." "Oh, he'd be so glad to see you," and all that stuff. And went on Liberty that night. Hadn't been more than 10 people go by and Sonny showed up.
Is that right?
Yeah. I said, "Sonny, how you doing?" "Good," he says. I said, "Sonny, I'm in trouble." I said, "I need some money." Borrowed money. Hadn't seen him for a couple of years, and the first thing I did is borrow some money from him. Those Liberties were expensive.
Yeah.
I wasn't used to it. But ended up, got back home. Spent a little time in the hospital with the arm. Had to have it repaired. On one of the repairs, I come close to losing it. It was black from the fingertips to the shoulder. And they told me that if there wasn't an improvement in 24 or 48 hours, 24 hours, I guess, they were going to amputate it. And I ended up with an old-time World War I doctor by the name of Waugh, W-A-U-G-H. Great, great guy in more ways than one. And he says, "You know," he says, "I've got some drawings and sketches and some notes and stuff." He says, I'm going to spend this evening looking. He says, "I'll see you in the morning." It's okay. He came in the morning. He says, "You know, I've got a little an idea." He says, I'd like to get into that arm and do this and do this and do that. I said, you're going to cut it off. No, I'm not, he says. I tell you I'm not, he says. You'll have it, I don't know what kind of shape it'll be, but you'll have it. And with his efforts, I was able to keep the arm. And it's been a source of aggravation for me, but it's not anything I couldn't live with.
Hmm. Was this a military hospital here in Mass? Or?
No, this was in the West Coast.
Oh, okay, okay.
No, I'm sorry. This was in Brighton Marine Hospital in Boston. That's
Okay.
right. I got my part of the countries mixed up. No, I was on my way back here.
Okay.
When they did that. And originally, the story went, there was a fellow that looked at it and said it's going to have to be amputated. And we were on different frequencies. I didn't like him. He didn't like me. It was just some tremendous friction there. So when this Dr. Waugh got involved with it, he says that this is what I'd like to do. And he says, but I have a small problem. He says, as you can see, I'm no kid. He says, and my hands won't let me operate. But he says, I have a gentleman that can. And it was the fellow that I was having the trouble with.
Oh, geez. Oh, okay. Oh, no.
So I said to him, when I found out what the story was, I says, he said, listen, I want you to remember one thing. This is my operation. It's not his. It's mine. He's going to supply the hands. I'm going to tell him what I want done and how I want it. He says, now I'll guarantee you, you'll have the arm when you get done. And I did. And I can use it to this day. So.
I'll be done.
But I thought it was interesting, the fellow that I had, I was having him. What, are you crazy? That's silly. That ain't gonna happen. But stayed a while on the West Coast. Went to Bainbridge, Maryland. Was discharged in Bainbridge. I don't know how far it is from Bainbridge, Maryland to Boston or Haverhill. I would say it's about a day's ride in an automobile. I got discharged on December 11th, I think it was, 1945. And it took me almost a month to get home.
Really?
Yeah. There was a lot of scenery, a lot of things I hadn't done. So there was a group of us. We got together, and there was...
From your unit?
Yeah.
Okay.
One was New Jersey.
Okay,
and,
gotcha.
Another one was going to come out the house with me. It started out to be about 6 of us, and we'd lose 2, and then we'd lose 2 more, and finally I got to go home and see my parents. But it was... She said, you said you was going to be... Well, I got tied up. I had things to do.
How was it finally getting back home after all that and having a home-cooked meal of your mom's and sleeping in your bed? What can you describe that homecoming?
It was not easy.
No?
It was a little difficult. It had to be I always refer to it as I left a kid and I went through my shares of ups and downs. And when I come back, you're an adult.
Yeah.
You know, it's a different set of rules, and you have to conduct and do things different.
Yeah.
It was hard. My mother had a tough time when she was able to pick up some stuff, and this Joe Holler from upstate Albany, New York, he got out first, and he went out to the house and see her. And told her, about the hit. And he tried to explain to her, too, that it really wasn't that serious.
Yeah.
A hit is a hit, but nonetheless, he's going to be all right. When she saw me walking in with 2 arms, well, that was all she had to have.
Wow.
But it was quite an experience. But it's left its mark. It's left its mark. There's guys there that...
that was my next question is, how did that period of your life affect you and play into your whole life?
I think it changes your perspective to no end. course, losing Hop, that was a problem for me then. It's a problem for me now. I mean, I
60
just
years later.
couldn't imagine that
Yeah.
that would happen to him. It just didn't seem possible. But he was a great guy, great guy, and I swear that he saved untold number of people. He really did. He knew what it was all about. In Tarawa, when we were getting into that yelling contest with the Japs, he was irate. He was going to take somebody's head off, and he would have done it too. He wasn't shy, and he had so much to contribute. I'm sure, and he would have stayed in the Marine Corps. I'm sure of that.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely convinced.
How was the transition from just military life, not to mention being in battle? What was the transition like from that back into the civilian life? Was that
things
much of a
that you do? Yeah, things that you do. We used to have what we called an 1104 form. It was just the start of the paperwork that these guys are having to contend with today. But an 1104 was a descriptive, an action formula or an action description. I've forgotten how it was worded. And everything you did after I'd made sergeant, you had to account for your actions. You had to. And I was just a kid.
Yeah.
I had more responsibility in guys' lives than it's possible to imagine. Once you're discharged from all that, you say to yourself, "Oh, all right, well, that's great," but you miss it.
Huh.
It was a part of your life. It didn't go away that easy.
Yeah.
It stayed with you. And the sieges in the hospital afterwards kept the military alive in me. I just had siege after siege with it. But it was, I'd say, almost 20 years after I was discharged, they were digging steel out of me.
Really?
Yeah. The tiniest, minute little pieces that were bothering. And they'd have to, in fact, they'd have a hard time to find them. They were so small. But the arm was a real problem, But went to work in a transportation company. And worked at that place for almost 20 years. I only had 3 jobs in my life, so I wasn't one to move around.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting part of life. It really was. And I was lucky and left some real good friends over there. But the vast grave deal there in Tarawa would never leave me. That was a 100-foot long grave, 12-foot, 14-foot wide. Double layers of troops buried in it. I can remember, I want to say he was a colonel with a helmet. Stood there with a helmet full of dog tags, ready to notify.
Wow.
Just an amazing thing. But that pretty well tells it, guy. It's basically what it was.
Well, as we start to wind down this interview, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about, or anything you're remembering in this interview that you wanted to bring up, as well as is there any closing statement you'd like to make?
Somewhat. I have a burr under my saddle here, if you will.
Okay.
I had an occasion to talk to a Marine recruiter up in Lawrence, Massachusetts here about 2-3 months ago. And he says, "Oh, boy," he says, "I'd like to get you to talk to some of my guys before they go off." And we had a long conversation. It lasted all one afternoon. And he was telling what those guys have to go through. And he says, "Dex, when you go into a building, if you had sufficient reason to go into a building, he said, you better have a damn lawyer standing right behind you on a retainer, because you're going to need him. He says, the moves that you guys made, he says, would be so wrong, and you'd spend so much time in court. It's hard for me to imagine that that's the case. It's a case of the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't like the fact that these troops, I don't know why their families have to be on food stamps. I don't know why we don't have the best military going. And I want to know who sent the Humvees over there made of old tin cans.
Yeah.
And I could go, and I better not. I better call it quits.
Okay.
All right. It's not right. It's
Yeah.
not right.
Yeah.
And a lot of these guys are paying a hell of a price for it.
Yeah.
I feel sorry for them. I don't know. But I think I pretty well got it covered.
Okay. Well, I really I want to thank you for sharing your story today. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, I wouldn't have wanted it any other way, that's for sure. But there's a lot of guys that I wish were here, but they're not. And I can look over there, that picture on the desk over there reminds me of a couple of guys that there's all kinds of side stories, you know. There's all most of them are good. Most of them are good.
Yeah.
And those are the ones I try to remember.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
All right.